$5 she was saving up to buy a car was missing from the safe in her bedroom dresser drawer. $5 in coins were also missing from the bottle that was used for her daughter's change bag. Shortly after the burglary was reported, Derry police officers arrived at the scene and spoke with Katz. She said that a man who lived in her apartment complex would occasionally walk by her door at night and stare into her blinds if they were open. This person of interest was Richard Langill. Upon questioning, he changed his story about his whereabouts during the incident. Initially, he told investigators that he was too sick to leave his apartment, but towards the end of the conversation, he corrected himself and said that he did leave his apartment to retrieve his mail. In the course of the week following the burglary, the safe, bottle, and bedroom dresser were processed for latent fingerprints. 4 sets were found on the top and right side of the safe, 5 on the bottle, and 1 on the top of the dresser. The developed prints were then photographed, lifted, packaged, and submitted to the New Hampshire Department of Safety Forensic Laboratory for further analysis. The following year, Lisa Corson, a level 1 criminalist at the state lab, analyzed and compared the prints and identified the print that was lifted from the bedroom dresser as belonging to Langill. He was subsequently charged with 1 count of burglary in the Rockingham Superior Court. Before the trial began, Langill's defense attorney filed a motion to exclude the fingerprint identification evidence, claiming that it was unreliable on the basis that Corson was not qualified to testify, that the methodology was unreliable, and that it was not applied adequately in this case. The state filed an objection, and on January 27, 2006 and October 11, 2006, the court held a 2-day Dobert hearing. On day 1 of the Dobert hearing, Corson testified that she used the ACE-V methodology to arrive at her conclusion and had her findings verified by Timothy Jackson, a criminalist with 20 years of experience in charge of the latent print unit at the state lab. On day 2 of the Dobert hearing, James Starrs, a professor at George Washington University who was considered an expert in the status of fingerprint comparisons, testified that Corson's identification was unreliable because she failed to take contemporaneous bench notes to memorize her findings. He further argued that blind verification was needed to reduce the possibility of bias and misidentification in this case. Stephen Ostrowski, a level 2 criminalist at the same lab, countered Starr's assertion by testifying that the lab's protocols did not require examiners to take contemporaneous bench notes. Ostrowski also testified that the Scientific Working Group on Friction Ridge Analysis Study and Technology, or SWIGFAST, did not require blind verification in single print comparisons, and that it was only used as a quality assurance measure, with no studies showing that it eliminated error. On January 19, 2007, Judge Patricia Coffey ruled that while Corson was qualified to provide expert testimony, she did not apply the ACE-V methodology reliably in this case because her documentation was incomplete and her verification was possibly biased. As a result, her expert testimony was excluded under Rule 702 of the New Hampshire Rules of Evidence. On February 9, 2007, the state filed a motion to reconsider, which was denied by Judge Coffey, who upheld her decision that there was not enough information to show that the ACE-V methodology was reliably applied in this case. Following this ruling, the New Hampshire Attorney General filed an appeal to the Supreme Court, arguing that the trial court overstepped its bounds by imposing admissibility requirements that have not been established in the scientific community. On April 4, 2008, after oral arguments were made by the state and defense, the New Hampshire Supreme Court reversed the decision to exclude Corson's testimony and remanded the case back to the Rockingham County Superior Court, where Langill was convicted on 1 count of burglary. The Supreme Court ruled that contemporaneous notes were not necessary to determine whether Corson applied the ACE-V methodology accurately. It was also noted that the fingerprint community at the time was debating whether blind verification mitigated error, and the Supreme Court determined that blind verification was not needed in order to produce reliable results. 2 years later, Langill appealed his case, and the Supreme Court reversed and remanded his conviction. The Supreme Court held that the trial court made a mistake denying Langill's motion to strike Corson's testimony and should not have admitted Corson's limited verification evidence that was determined to be hearsay. As a result of the legal challenges that were faced in Richard Langill versus the state of New Hampshire, the National Research Council's report, Strengthening Forensic Science in the United States, Path Forward, made a recommendation that all latent print examinators document the relevant information they gather as they go through each phase of the ACE-V process. The reasoning for this is that examiners would be able to provide a transparent record of the methods they used to the courts to assess their reliability. In 2012, SWIGFAST developed a standard for ACE-V documentation with stricter guidelines that would be incorporated into the standard operating procedures of latent print units in accredited crime labs across the country. That same year, SWIGFAST issued an updated standard for the application of blind verification of friction-rich examinations. It suggested the use of blind verification in cases involving a single print being used to generate a conclusion on an individual. The fingerprint evidence in this case faced sharp scrutiny, but the standards in ACE-V documentation and blind verification that have been developed have strengthened the science of fingerprints and forensic science as a whole.